Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles, trying to bring nuance to controversial issues. The very first podcast I did was with Danny Cesena on the topic of transgenderism. The third episode I did was with Corinna Cohn on transgenderism. And then I've done 6 or 7 since then, in addition to other Instagram lives on the issue of transgender, because I think it's very complex and I don't think it's as nuanced as binary, ironically, as people would make it seem to be. But today is going to be a little bit different. Today I'm going to talk about detransitioning, and my guest that I'm very excited and very honored to talk to is Chloe Cole. Chloe, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for talking to me. I think this is a really, really important conversation that I hope that people who wouldn't normally hear your story are going to be able to hear your story. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
So, detransitioning. The way that I heard about you, a little bit about your story, is because I have a wide array of news sources. I listen to a lot of stuff on the far left and a lot of stuff on the far right, kind of everything in between. And you kept coming up on things on the right. And I didn't see you anywhere on the left. And it's just the right. It's Fox News and it's Matt Walsh and it's all this stuff. Tulsi Gabbard, I guess you could say, is not of the right. But other than that, I don't see a lot from the left. And my people, my teachers are generally of the left. And that worried me. I said, this is a really important topic that people are completely oblivious to. So what are your thoughts initially? I do want to get into your story, but what are your thoughts on that politicized element of everything going on? Because it seems to be very politicized, where just the people on the political right, the conservatives, are talking about this.
Yeah, so the only mainstream figures who are really addressing the topic of children medically transitioning and detransition are are on the right, but it's less of a partisan issue than it's made out to be. I mean, my my followers on Twitter are pretty much half and half. Like, there are people from all different walks of life with different views. I mean, from traditional conservatives to Christians to feminists and even some transgender people.
Yeah.
So it's really not really it's not a black and white issue, but the narrative has just been so skewed.
Yeah. Well, it's really frustrating because there is this element. I think Trump probably is part of it, is a big part of it, but it's like almost like anti-gravity. If Trump says it's up, then it must be down. You know, if someone like Matt Walsh says it's up, then it must be down for people like in my field. And that is a real problem, because if you're being, connected with those people and they go, I'm not even going to look over there. And that's why I think it's really important. I hope for you to come on this show, because I have access to people who wouldn't typically watch Laura Ingraham or something like that, but they can still tell the story. So you're only 18 years old. Yeah. And I don't mean that in like a bad way. I don't mean that like paternalistic way, but like you're the age that I teach. I teach seniors in high school and I have for 17 years. So you still are not a kid, you're a legal adult, but you're
Yeah.
still very young. Can you I think that stories are really important. I'm a big follower of John Haidt, a social psychologist, and as much as Ben Shapiro says facts don't care about your feelings, I disagree, Ben. Facts come second to your feelings, because the human brain is a story processor, not a logic processor, according to John Haidt, who's a brilliant social psychologist. So stories matter. Can you tell us your story? Like
Yeah.
your story. Just let's start from, little girl, whatever, just like the whole story up to you now. I'll just kind of let you kind of go through that, if you don't mind.
So, from a pretty young age, well before I started transitioning or even have thoughts of wanting to be the opposite sex, I was actually a pretty I was pretty girly, kind of half and half girly and tomboyish. Um, I'm the youngest of 5 children, and I have 2 older sisters and 2 older brothers, and so I kind of have influence from both. But growing up, I really did like wearing dresses, skirts, necklaces, jewelry, playing with dolls. Um, but I also liked kind of just stealing my older brother's like Legos and Nerf guns and playing their video games with them. Um, it wasn't until I got older that gender or sex really started to really um,
Become an issue,
become
become a
something.
thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, some of the cartoons I watched and like some of the comics and books I read as a kid kind of portrayed female characters as like kind of airheaded, stupid, always getting
Mm.
in the way of the main characters. And the main characters almost always were young boys, and they're always like the cool ones, the funny ones, and like there is kind of like a clear contrast. But um there was also like a change in social dynamics as I got older, and especially as I started to hit puberty and go into middle school. I started to not really get along with girls as much, and sometimes they would target me in their bullying, and I found that I fit in a lot more with the boys. Um, but even in general, I struggled socially, um, and it turns out that that's because I actually am autistic. I'm on the spectrum.
Okay. And that wasn't diagnosed at the time.
It wasn't diagnosed until I was 17, actually, so it took quite a while. Before that
Mm.
diagnosis, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD at around 6 or 7 years old, and then they started medicating me when I was 10.
Wow. Okay. With
And I was also diagnosed with disruptive behavioral disorder. Um, Usually this would present as me just not getting along with other kids and sometimes like throwing like a tantrum in class or something. But um
yeah, I mean, I have kids and I've been teaching high school. Like a lot of this stuff is normal kid stuff.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
I
that I
understand
think the
autism. Yeah.
I think the ADHD and disruptive behavior disorder diagnosis were BS,
Yeah.
honestly. Like
Uh,
there were real issues that weren't really being addressed. They just wanted to diagnose me, and eventually they medicated me, which was, I guess, the easiest route to take.
yeah.
That's
Well,
kind of a common theme here though, actually.
it's
Um
extremely common. Yeah. I mean, how old were you? 10? So you were a puppy and they're telling a puppy to just sit in a room under fluorescent lights and listen to someone talk in front of the room. And then when they don't do it, there's something wrong with them. Like, yeah,
yeah,
that doesn't make
and
it
then they
make
started
sense.
they started putting me on these medications, and they wouldn't work, and their approach to this would be to either constantly switch between medications or just constantly raise the dose, raise the dose, raise the dose until eventually I was at a dose of ADHD medications that was typical for an adult male at
When
age
you
at age 10 or 11.
Chloe, when you say they, are you talking about your doctors? Is this
My
pushed by, is
doctors,
this your
yes.
parent? What were
My
your parents
doctors.
thinking at the time?
Um, I mean, these were the doctors. They trusted them. They
Yeah.
wanted to be able to put their trust in them.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was kind of a difficult kid, so they just wanted to be able to sort that out and make things easier not only for me but also yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of kids with ADHD who are just like, I'm trying to study, I'm trying to focus, I'm trying, and they get so upset. And you want to
Yeah.
take away that frustration and pain in the child. And I really understand that. So what do I do?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the expert, and the expert says this. So okay, I'm at a loss. I want to just help me make the life of my child better. And if it's this, then I'll do this. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of how a lot of my childhood went, actually. And then at 11, I actually that was when I got my first phone. Um it was an iPhone, and pretty quickly after I started using social media because all my peers were doing the same thing, and I wanted to fit in and be able to connect with them, and so I made my first Instagram account,
When you were
and
11?
yeah, this is actually against the rules, but it's so easy to just circumvent the age limit
Yeah,
because there's
that's
no they don't actually check. They don't use ID or anything. It's just like, oh, you say you're born on this date. Okay, I guess we'll go with that.
Yeah, Chloe, I was talking about John Haidt. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's a big advocate against Instagram, especially for young preteen girls. He's like because he's just like a data nerd. And he said
Mhm.
the data is so clear for preteen girls how bad Instagram is. And he thinks it should be banned for that specific demographic. You're kind of helping his case.
I don't know if I believe in like a full-on ban, but they need to enforce like the lower age limit better.
Yeah.
Maybe start using like some form of identification because the content on there is just it's damaging, and it was for me at the time that I started using it. I mean, pretty soon after I started making an account, I was just exposed to all sorts of posts that just weren't developmentally appropriate for me to be seeing. Like some of it was um it was like feminist content or like content posted by like other young women,
Mhm.
a lot of whom were older than me and like were adults, but they were young adults, and they would post themselves in very idealized, very sexualized ways, like very skimpy clothing, like a lot of makeup. A lot of them had like they had plastic surgery done on either their faces or their bodies or both. And so they were just at this I was being presented this unattainable standard, and I was 11, 12. I was only a few years into puberty, and so I I didn't have a very developed body, and but I also didn't understand. I was so young that I didn't understand that I wasn't really supposed to look like that in the first place either. But
Did
aside
you
from
No, I'm sorry, but like you had a big household. So like did you talk to your older sisters about this stuff? Were you kind of like that's a lot, Chloe. That's a lot for an 11 or 12-year-old. It's a
mm,
lot. I don't think social media, and I'm not passing judgment, but like I don't think it's good. I just think it's really really detrimental.
it
What
really
about the
is.
people in your life? Like what did they were they aware of this? Were you hiding it from them? What was going on with that?
Um, so I was kind of hiding like my social media accounts from my family for a while, but I also wasn't very close to my older sisters because I mean there's kind of a considerable age gap between me and my older siblings, and so they moved out pretty soon. And I wasn't very close to them for that reason.
Okay.
But aside from that, the posts by other women, and usually like other girls my age, but I would kind of hear this sort of thing even from women who are older than me, and even in real life. But I would just see like a lot of girls just basically making out womanhood to be this awful nightmare, like saying things like, "Oh, women are and have always been oppressed, and we're getting our rights taken away, and um, periods, pregnancy, childbirth, it's terrifying and it's awful, and there's nothing good about it." And they never really talked about the beauty in the female experience, and so naturally I started to fear growing into a woman as a
Oh,
preteen girl.
oh, okay.
And I
So
wasn't really
yeah,
close to any women in my life, so I didn't really have anybody to refute this. And the
this
girls who I
isn't
was
something you
friends
could
with
yeah, you
would
couldn't talk
kind
to your
of
mom about this.
reinforce. Yeah, I never really talked to my mom about this because I mean I kind of wasn't really sure how to bring up that conversation in the first place. And the girls who I was close with, the girls who I was friends with, would kind of reinforce this way of thinking as well. It's it was pretty unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. So then the idea of going through maturation as a woman is like, I don't want to deal with periods. That seems
Yeah,
terrible. I don't
it
want to grow
was
up to be someone
terrifying.
who's oppressed. That seems terrible.
And a lot of the girls I knew growing up actually had been like victims of abuse or stalking or sexual assault, and I started to fear that happening to myself. Um, and aside from the content posted by other women, I was involved. I was involved in like communities around like gaming, anime, cartoons, and for some reason in those communities on Instagram, there just so happened to be um, a lot of accounts that also happened to be like teenagers and young adults who identified as like LGBTQ, like bisexual, pansexual, transgender, and over time I started to get more of that sort of content in my feed, and it would like dominate my feed too. I was starting to see a bunch of posts specifically from like groups of girls that identified as boys, and they were pretty young. They were like ages 12 to 19.
Mm.
And I was just getting bombarded with this, and I saw how these other girls, they were kind of like me. They were kind of nerdy, kind of awkward, kind of on the boyish side, and eventually one day it just came to them that they weren't actually a girl. And as they started like their transition and they went down that route, they started to get, I saw how much support they started to get, and it seemed like people really had their back. And as a socially awkward kid who struggled to make friends, especially of the same sex, it spoke to me a little bit, and naturally it kind of led to me questioning that sort of thing with my for myself. Like it started with um who am I attracted to, and then it went on to what is my gender identity, and I kind of like switched through labels over a short period of time until one day it just, I had an epiphany that maybe I don't want to be a girl anymore, and maybe I'm actually a boy.
And you would have instant community and instant like recognition and praise for that.
For me,
Something along those lines.
it actually wasn't instant. Um, when I came out to my family, they were supportive of me, and they wanted, they loved me, and they wanted what was best for me. But
But did you think it was going to be instant? Was that like the idea is if I do make this decision, then I would have these things?
it was less about the timing and more about just about the support on its own.
You just needed
But
the support. Okay.
I was in middle school when I started socially and medically transitioning, and um, my peers actually didn't they didn't treat me very well because of it for a while. It wasn't until high school that I started passing as the opposite sex and being treated as like a member of the male sex and being respected. But so I came out to, first it was some people at school, and then my older sister,
How old were
and
you at the
then
time? This is when you were how old?
I was 12. Um and I started getting shorter haircuts and buying clothing from the boys section. And then eventually I wrote a coming out letter to my parents, and I just left it on the table because I mean it was kind of an intimidating thing to talk about face to face, and I wanted to allow them some time to think about it before before they before we had like a face to face conversation about it. Um and they were surprised, but they also, they wanted to be able to support me, and they weren't really sure what to do with about this because I mean they're just normal people. They're not like experts in psychology or anything like that. They wanted a second opinion, and they wanted some professional help, and so they got me a therapist.
Okay. Well, it is very young. I mean, at 12 years old, I mean, I was still playing with GI Joes and stuff like that. Like, I mean, it's to say like, hey, this is what I like, I'm attracted to. It's like, do you really even know at 12 what that means? Like, do you know what like were you exposed to like sexual things? Like, you knew basically how it worked, like that kind of stuff,
Um,
birds and the bees stuff.
I wouldn't say that I was exposed to it in a healthy manner. I had peers who were really precocious, and I mean, before I was even in middle school, a lot of my peers would talk about like really adult things, and so my knowledge of that kind of thing came to me from a perspective that wasn't like from an adult, like either like an educator or my parents. I never had that kind of discussion with my parents. And so I learned about these things before I even had sex ed, and I was far too young to even know about these things. And when I started using the internet at a young age, I was kind of just bombarded with this kind of thing, and it was freely available to me. I didn't really have any restricted internet access, so it was kind of just there, unfortunately. And it was very easy. It is very easy to access. Um,
Okay. So
and
you
so
so
that was
yeah.
one thing that, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So you came out as did you come out as gay at that point in that letter, or was it came out as like I want
No,
to be
I
a
came
boy?
out as a boy. I told my parents I
You're
wanted
a
to
boy.
be their
Okay.
son, that I wanted them to refer to me by a certain name, and I did kind of switch around between names before deciding on a final one. They did kind of pressure me on that. They're like, "You can't keep switching between names. We want to."
Now
It's gonna get
there's some rules
confusing.
now. um Yeah, I mean, I wonder if like you said there's a connection to like anime and stuff like that. And then you're talking about the name and picking the name. Like, I wonder if it's that connection of like fantasy. Like it's fun to pretend that you're these characters and you're something more powerful than you are when you're just a kid. You don't feel like you have any power in the world. Like I can fantasize, I could be this kind of thing. I understand why that would make a connection.
Yeah. I mean, I did grow up watching a little bit of anime. I mean, it started with Sailor Moon on VHS
Mhm.
tapes.
Yeah.
And then eventually I started using the internet and looking up like other series, and then I found
Yeah.
um less like girl oriented series and more just like the general kind of anime. And then my older siblings growing up would often show me like Ghibli movies like Ponyo, Howl's Moving Castle, things like that. And
Okay.
so it was kind of just I was kind of just surrounded with it. That sort of a lot of it was very fantasy oriented.
Yeah. Okay, so you say that you feel like you're a boy, you're a kid. Kids say that there are a lot of different things. You're kind of working this out. You're out discovering the world. That's what young people are going to do. They're trying to figure out what is up and what is
Yeah.
down. And you don't know. I mean, the world is very confusing. I'm 40 and I have no idea. I know like a little bit more than you maybe. Like I don't know. So it's very very complex obviously the world. And then at what point does it get to like how does it move on then from I think I'm this, I'm trying to figure it out to let's start making some bigger steps or changes.
So the information I had online um about transitioning, both from like social media websites and from like actual like, official medical resources, um kind of push transition as the only means of treating gender dysphoria. I never really saw like anything about any alternatives to transitioning or even just like accepting yourself as the sex you live in. It was kind of like dysphoria is incurable unless you transition basically and become your supposed true self. And it was kind of the same with my doctors actually. My parents got me a therapist, and he didn't really question anything at all. Like, I had some stuff that was going on at home and at school, and it wasn't really addressed. And I felt kind of frustrated with this actually. But he also reinforced my transition, and pretty much every other medical professional who was involved with it, by basically just saying, "Oh, you want me to call you this name? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. And you want me to call you boy? Okay, I'll do that." There was no real questioning of where those feelings came from, and why I wanted to pursue this. Um,
It's strange to me,
I
Chloe.
was
Like,
referred to a
yeah. I'm sorry,
I
continue.
was referred to a gender specialist who I think was the one to diagnose me with gender dysphoria. And again, there wasn't really any questioning of where this came from. Not a lot of my background was really seriously examined, I feel like.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I'm a school teacher, so I love the Socratic method, and I ask questions about everything. I mean, everything. It's strange the lack of. Or was there a lot of people that were just asking like tons of questions of you, like, are you sure? What do you think about this? What do you like about this? What is it? Was there a lot of that going on to try and pick? So because you make these declarations when you're young, and then you have to work through that. You have to kind of chew on it for a while. Like, I think this is up. Well, how do you test that? Let's keep testing these hypotheses that you have when you're a young kid trying to figure out the world. Was that done? Was there a lot of like having you answer questions?
it's kind of difficult to remember so far back. I
Okay.
mean, I was so young. This was like 6 or 7 years ago at this point. So, but
Did it feel that way though? Did it feel like you were had to really work your way through this stuff, or did it feel like it was just like a paved road? Like, you said this, let's go.
yeah, it kind of felt like the latter actually. Like
Okay.
the amount of time between like getting diagnosed with dysphoria and then getting like an appointment with an endocrinologist and then actually getting medicated was very short actually. It was only a matter of months. So I was diagnosed with dysphoria, um, and then just a few months after, I asked my gender specialist to um, I told her that I was interested in pursuing the medical path because I mean I thought that I was actually a boy and that I also had this condition that was only treatable through medication. And so I started to seek that. And during my first appointment with an endocrinologist, he actually um, refused to put me on any medication because of my age. He said that there could be some serious concerns for my brain development. But it was I was kind of naive. As much I should have
You're
listened to that.
you were a child, Chloe. It's not. Yeah, you were a naive because you were a child. Like, you were a normal kid if you're being naive when you're 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah, and I mean
Normal.
I never heard anything like this before. Like every other doctor I had was like they had like no it's like they didn't have any second thoughts about what they were doing, what they were allowing me to do. But the second it was very easy to just get referred to another endocrinologist, and after only about one or two appointments with her, um, that was when me and my mom got the consent forms and we signed off on them. And it was only about 2 months after that that I started on, well, it started with puberty blockers, and then a month after that was when I got my first testosterone injection.
So you were 13.
Yeah, I was 13.
That's elite. Like I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, how does that leap happen so quickly from I think I'm this to let's inject you with things. That seems like a very quick thing. And I think a lot of people listening um, are going to think that there's a process when you want to start transitioning where you have to live this way for several years, because it used to be that way. I had Buck
Yeah.
Angel on my podcast and several others, Xander Keg and others. Like, they had to live that way for a while. It was a
Hmm.
lot of intensive therapy. And that seems to make a lot more sense. It's like, are you sure this is up? All right, let's test this for a while to make sure that this is up. And
Yeah.
it happened so quickly for you.
And doing what they did, they actually went against their own guidelines at the time. Um, the W Path guidelines, I think, were I don't remember the age limit on puberty blockers, but the minimum age for starting cross-sex hormones was, I think, either 15 or 16, if not older. But only after only a matter of months being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, I would say like not even half a year was when I started on these treatments.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you feel when you started getting I mean, testosterone, how did you feel? The last podcast I did was with someone who wrote a sci-fi book
Mm,
um about that. If women could take testosterone but not get the and some would say negative side effects of like masculine, features and stuff, but only get the
mm.
positive elements and how that would change society. It's a really interesting book. How did you how did you feel when you started taking it?
Um, I think it's important to first talk about how I felt while I was taking the blockers.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
please.
so they said that the reason why they spaced out like a month or so time between starting the blockers and starting the testosterone was to allow my body to clear of its natural sex hormone production to make way for the androgens. And so I started taking the puberty blockers for about like a year or so. I had about 3 injections, 3 or 4, and these really sucked because they were like a it was like a big needle, and I would have to go to the doctor's office to get it injected into it was actually the side of my butt, so it was really painful and it sucked, and the side effects sucked. Um, after
How
about
so?
a after about a week or so, once the hormones were flushed out of my body, I started to feel a little bit depressed, a little bored all the time, just constantly waiting for the next big thing, which for me was testosterone. And it was a little more difficult to concentrate in class for a few reasons, not only because of that slight depressed feeling, but I also started getting hot flashes, not quite unlike the kind that women who are menopausal get. Usually, women start getting hot flashes when they are in their mid 50s to their 60s. I was getting these at 13, and they were bad. I couldn't wear sweaters or jackets or anything more than a t-shirt and shorts and sneakers in the wintertime because it was that bad, and it would make my whole body itch, and it was unbearable. And
Chloe, was that community there for you? Like, hey, we get it. This is part of it. This is part of the whole thing. We just wait. It's all going to be good. Like, were they there to support you during this time? The ones that were supporting you to make these steps?
so by this point in time, I wasn't actually very involved in like the transgender online community. And when I started transitioning, I was kind of alone in that way. It was just kind of something that I was doing on my own.
Were you talking to your
But
parents about it? Was your mom
yeah,
there?
I was.
What was
But
your mom kind of the same way she was with the drugs? Like, I don't know. I'm gonna trust the doctors again.
yeah,
Okay.
but my parents weren't just being complacent or neglectful. The doctors, and I didn't know this until just a few months ago when I had a conversation with them about my transition, but the therapists and the physicians actually told them that if I wasn't allowed to proceed with transition as I wanted, I would be at risk of suicide. They cited very faulty statistics around transition suicide of adolescents who identify as transgender, and they use them against my parents to guilt them into allowing me to do as I pleased and basically give up their rights as parents.
Yeah, you tell that to a parent. Suicides on behind one door. You open up the other door blindly. You don't care what's behind the other door. Yeah.
And it was actually false because I didn't feel suicidal at all before my transition. Um, it it made me worse. I started feeling suicidal after about 2 years on testosterone, but um, before I get to that, I should talk about what starting on testosterone felt like and what happened between my eighth grade year and my sophomore year. Um, so starting on testosterone, I mean, I finally had sex hormones in my body again, and it felt great because I finally had the energy to do things again. And I mean, I had like a mild euphoric effect, I guess. Um, and I had more energy to do things, and I started becoming more active. And I mean, this was a huge milestone that for me. And so it felt like I was finally accomplishing something and that I was really starting to become the person who I wanted to be. And by this point I was a little bit um though I wasn't necessarily involved in like the online trans community, I did have some friends online who were um like trans, non-binary, some people who called themselves allies, and they did celebrate this. They did congratulate me, and so it felt good. But I started to my voice started to drop pretty quickly. I would say maybe within like a week of taking it, and over time I started to get like a more squarish jawline, thicker eyebrows, a larger nose, a more prominent brow bone, larger shoulders, more muscle throughout my body. Um, and it felt good. I felt like I had control over myself and that I was starting to look good because I mean before this I had some pretty bad body image issues, and it just felt good to be able to change things for once. Um, by this point in time, I wasn't really out to anybody in school other than some people who were closer to me. So
Well,
people
they
took
could
notice
tell
of
though,
it.
right?
Yeah, they could.
I mean,
Um, it started to become obvious by the end of the school year. Um, but I did experience some bullying in my last year of junior high. Um, over like my changing presentation and eventually like my all the other changes that came with medically transitioning. Um, there was one particular boy though who would target me a lot. He would like spit on me in class. He would just do some really nasty stuff. And one day, towards the end of the school year, he came up to me in the middle of a classroom and he sexually assaulted me. He groped me. And by this point, I was like wearing like baggy boys' clothes and I thought that my chest wasn't very visible, and so I never really cared to try and hide it, I guess. But after that happened, I kind of downplayed the effects of it in my head. I was kind of just like, oh, just man up, don't worry about it. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to, even if I really felt threatened by it, I wouldn't really be able to reach out to anybody because I knew if I like brought it up to the school office that because there was no real solid evidence of this happening, they would just give the kid a slap on the wrist, maybe like a week-long suspension, and then he would come back the next week and maybe do something worse to me. And so I stayed quiet about this, but it actually made a pretty big impact on me. And shortly after, I started, I asked my mom to buy me a binder, which is a compression device that covers the torso, and in the chest area of it, it um it has this area that basically compresses the breast to make for like a flatter appearance. And so I started wearing a binder to hide this vulnerable part of me from the world. I didn't realize it, but I was scared of ever being assaulted again. And that was my way out from this. And so I was using those for a few years, and I would wear them on average maybe about like 6 to 8 hours per day. Um, I'd wear them to school. I would wear them while working out, going on runs, swimming, and I
Did it
would walk
hurt?
home from school
Was it
in this
physically
really.
painful?
It wasn't painful for me, but it was uncomfortable the way it would like stick to me, especially because it's really hot where I live in the summer and like in the early fall it gets up to like 100 to 115 degrees on the worst days, and I would be walking home in that weather with I mean a t-shirt, these heavy jeans, and then this compression device underneath all of that. And I mean, I got sick of it. I wanted to be free of that. I wanted to stop using it, but I also didn't want to worry about the appearance of my breasts from under my clothing. I didn't want that sexual tension that I thought it would bring to me, but I also was afraid of my peers seeing that and figuring out that I wasn't actually a boy, because by the time I entered high school, I looked like a boy, sounded like a boy. Everybody around me knew me as Leo, and it was only really people that I went to elementary school with and middle school with who knew the truth. But even then, some people didn't even recognize me. So it was,
I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's really heartbreaking, Chloe. I'm really sorry.
and wanting to fit in and avoid what I thought was a consequence of just being female, and also genuinely believing that I was a boy and wanting to look like the other boys my age led to me starting to become dissatisfied and seeking a mastectomy.
Well, that
And
that that assault aligns with everything that kind of started you on this pathway, which is the negatives of being a woman. Is you're going to be a victim. You're going to be a
yeah,
victim, and then you're like, oh, that was right. I'm right to be moving in this direction because I don't want to be a victim anymore. And when you're scared of being victimized and then you are victimized, all of that confirmation bias just ramps up everything else that's going on for you, huh?
it and it doesn't have to be that way, but I didn't really fully understand that at the time. I just wanted a way out, and I didn't know how to actually address that kind of thing, and I didn't really trust the adults around me, and especially the school staff, to be able to really take care of me in that situation. So the thoughts kind of just festered over time, unfortunately.
Why didn't you trust the adults in your life? Because you've been burned so many times because the professionals in like the medical industry, you know, at this point, maybe you didn't think they were burning you. Why didn't you go to all of the adults in your life and tell them all of this stuff? This is a lot that you were going through. It's a lot for a child to be wrestling through alone. It'd be a lot for anybody to be wrestling through alone. Why did you feel like you had to be alone in this?
I was afraid of telling my parents because I didn't want to make them upset, and I knew that the natural progression would be to talk to the school office about it. And I wanted to avoid the school office because, I mean, at the middle school I went to, I wasn't a very popular kid, and I didn't really fit in with other kids. Sometimes I would be subject to bullying, and sometimes even the my teachers, some of my teachers would bully me and target me as well. And the school staff, especially in the office, they really weren't very kind to me either, and I couldn't really rely on them for some things. I mean, I remember one incident where so after I started puberty blockers, it kind of like forced my body to have one final period before I went on testosterone. And this started in the middle of an assembly, so I had to go up to the office and ask for like a pad from them. And the woman at the desk screamed at me. She yelled at me for asking. And there were a few incidents like that actually,
Okay,
where I just wouldn't be able to rely on them.
Okay, so this is actually I would like to dive into this a little bit, Chloe, because teachers will be listening. Um, I had a conversation with my 8-year-old the other day, and this is kind of putting his dirty laundry out there, but he did something that was bullying to another boy at the school.
Mhm.
And I explained it to him. I was like, "Do you think that might be bullying?" He's like, "No." And then I walked him through it. And then he realized he had this epiphany, like, "Oh my gosh, what I did bullied him." He started crying. He felt really bad. He didn't connect that what he was doing maybe hurt that boy's feelings. Can you explain? You said teachers bullied you. What does that look like? Because there are teachers who are listening that might not realize that what they're doing is bullying. Or why would that woman at the school nurse, why would she yell at you for asking for a pad? Because she thought that you were a boy asking for a pad? Like,
No,
can
she
you just
knew by that point I didn't really pass as the opposite sex yet,
okay.
and they knew exactly who I was. Um,
So
and they knew that
what's
they knew that
going
I was a
on?
girl. I
Yeah,
don't know
what's
why that happened, but as for like teachers bullying me, I remember one specific incident where you know, I kind of have like some sort of more inattentive tendencies, and it is kind of hard for me to focus on things, and especially was as a kid because they called me hyperactive, but I think I was just like a normal kid, just kind of struggling a little bit. But I would often like socialize and laugh with my. I was kind of a class clown, and there is one time when I was talking to one of my peers in about sixth grade in class, and I was being a little disruptive. We were laughing quite a bit, and the teacher told me that basically just to settle down, and otherwise I would get in trouble. And
children's laughter? There's nothing worse than that. Yeah.
I
Okay.
guess I did it so much that she decided that I needed to be punished for it, and she said that she took away the entire class's privileges because of it, and she said to the whole class, "You can all thank Chloe for this."
Those
And
things
there,
Those things stick with you. Those things stick with you. It might that's a great example, Chloe. Thank you, because those are things that teachers do. Just trying to get it's hard. Being a teacher with a crazy classroom is hard. And you just go, okay, here, I gotta do something because blah blah blah, blah. And I'm trying to nip this in the bud. I don't know. I'm stressed. I got all these things. But the you know, these things have huge effects. And it's important for educators to know that what you say and do really, really matters.
yeah, and I was kind of a disruptive kid, but I was also like a very sensitive kid who struggled socially. And every teacher I had was well aware of this or made aware of this by my parents. So we had like an IEP plan and
Yeah.
everything, and they stressed that like I was like a kid who was a little more.
Yeah, Chloe, this is, you had an IEP. Like, so teachers, doctors, all these people have failed you at this point. At this point, you're what, 14 years old, 13 years old. They have failed you over and over and over again. You've been failed by the adults that are supposed to be in charge of you in your life.
Yeah, kind of all around, both the educators and on the medical side of things. But at 15, when I was in my sophomore year, I started to seek a mastectomy, and my gender specialist referred me to a surgeon, and there wasn't really a vetting process at all. There wasn't like a deep psychological evaluation. It was just like, okay, so this is standard treatment for dysphoria. She can let's go ahead and do this. And I'd say I had about two or three appointments between the the first referral and the actual date of the surgery, which was I think no more than about 6 or 7 months, if not shorter than that. Um, and I remember I was referred to after my first appointment. I was referred to a top surgery classroom, they called it, within a hospital building. That was for it was for parents and their dysphoric children, their dysphoric girls to attend to learn more about like the process and the different kinds of incisions and ways they do it. And when I attended that classroom, it immediately struck me how um, young or feminine some of these other girls my age looked like. They were a lot earlier in the process, and some of them were even younger than me, and they were already pursuing surgery. So that kind of that
Younger
shocked me at the
than
time.
younger than 15.
Yeah, some of them looked to be no older than about 12 or 13. But this didn't really deter me from doing this. It was like, okay, so these just are girls my other trans boys my age who are seeking this, and I'm sure they'll get it down the line once they're more advanced in the process. But after that, after just a few months, was when I got my double mastectomy, and up until the operation and up until a few weeks afterward, actually, I was pretty sure about this. I really felt like it was the right thing to do, and as soon as I woke up from it and I was like lucid enough to realize what just happened, I was happy about it. It felt nice. I mean, it was like, well, I'll finally be able to hang out shirtless and swim in the pool without a shirt now and things
And
like
not
that.
be sexually assaulted in the same way.
Yeah. And it really wasn't that simple because, well, this was about 2.5 years ago, and I'm still in the recovery process. I still can't expose. It was. I thought I would be able to like go out on runs or like swim shirtless, but that would require um my body to be fully that part of my body to be fully healed, and 2 years later it's far from fully healed.
You don't have to go into details that are uncomfortable for you, but I what is in what ways do you mean fully healed?
So I'm sorry if this is a little bit graphic, but I feel like this does need to
If
be
you're
heard,
okay with it, I
especially
think
by
it's
by educators. But so the operation that I went under was called double mastectomy with nipple grafts, meaning that they not only cut, I think, either under like towards like the middle of my breast and then took the tissue out and then like left some tissue in to contour it, but they also the way they described this to me as a 15-year-old, in order to make it more digestible for me, was that they like scraped like an area on my chest, kind of like a deep knee scrape, but more controlled. That's the exact wording they used. And they removed my nipples and then they put it in that area of scraped tissue to, they called it, create a more masculine appearance. It's like,
it's quite an
I don't even
undertaking.
I don't even I don't even know how to describe it. It's a horrible process. And before this, I was actually trying to go for another kind of incision that wasn't as invasive and wouldn't like sever my nipples. But they kept my surgeon kept pushing me like, oh, there might be blood supply issues. It's an experimental operation,
So there's no
which is kind of
sensitivity.
kind of BS because this whole thing is an experiment. But um,
So there's no
I was kind
sensitivity.
of,
Essentially, is that the idea?
yeah. Um, I mean, I've had some recovery and sensation, but that's not even the biggest issue here. Um, 2 years after the fact, I had a regression in healing, and now the top area of skin is basically barely there, and it like leaks clear fluid, and I have to wear bandages on my chest every day, all the time, so that it doesn't get on my bedding, get on my clothing. And I haven't been able to figure out just what it is. I'll get to that later, but um, in the initial months after And even the initial weeks after my surgery, I started to reality kind of slapped me in the face because then I had to deal with the post-op recovery period. And the first part of that was I was basically stuck at home and I couldn't really do much. The pain medications they had me on, I had to go off them within a matter of less than 2 days actually, because the pain of the digestive issues that they were causing were actually worse than the pain that was in my chest, which is more like a deep muscle soreness.
Okay.
So the pain wasn't too bad, but the post-op process and having to look at that part of my body being all cut up and like the top layer of skin on the grafts basically just being dead was it was traumatizing actually. I was 15 years old and I was looking at an area of dead skin on my chest and these huge scars and these bandages all over it, and I had to replace all that all by myself, and it was a lot to deal with. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to deal with. Um,
like the
so
changes in sensation, and I think like a few weeks after my after I was discharged, um I went back to the nurse's office to get my some stitches torn out, and the sensation was it was like numb, but I still felt like the stitches being pulled out of me, and it made me want to throw up because it felt so disgusting. And I some of this was described in like the consent forms and the post-op forms, but nothing could really prepare me for what it actually was like. And
were the doctors saying that it was like this is normal to cover their butts, or were they
yeah, it was kind of just presented. This whole thing was just presented to me as like just part of the process, and that it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fully healed by about a year.
so you're now at a surgery, you're dealing with things that you did not expect, a lot of negative feelings. Did that
Things
start?
that even though I was told about,
Yeah. Like you can read a book on prison, but the first night when people are yelling fresh fish, you're like, oh, this isn't quite what I expected. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so I started progressively getting worse after my surgery, actually. Like, not only was I dealing with the stress of
Worse mentally.
looking at,
Okay.
yeah, looking at like this cut up part of my body and then having to like change my dressings and then like watch it just slowly heal as time went on. Um, by this point in time, COVID started, and
Oh,
yeah, and
wonderful.
so we
Yeah,
had
let's
we
get
had
more
we had quarant
isolated.
we yeah we had quarantine
Oh,
and distance learning, and so I was super isolated. Um,
yeah.
an interesting thing, actually, I don't know if I can bring this up. Yeah, I should probably save this for my legal proceedings. But
Yeah. No, for sure. Okay. So
so
COVID
no,
comes
I
around.
was
You're still dealing with the dressing. You're still dealing with all of this horrible things with the repercussions to a surgery that is very, very complex.
yeah,
Not a very simple
and
surgery.
generally reserved for cancer patients,
Right.
which
Life or death.
puberty blockers are actually the same. They were originally made for people who had as like a cancer drug,
Yeah. I have
and
loved
so
ones
they
who
were
went
being
through that. Yeah.
used. It was being used as it was being used off label to treat psychiatric disorder.
Right. Right.
That's kind of a common thing here, unfortunately. But
Okay. So at this point you're 15. You're going through this, and then you're
15
16.
going on 16, yeah. And then I went back to school, and well, it was mostly online, so I was super isolated from my peers, and I actually lost some friends over some stupid unrelated dramas, so I was kind of alone. And I thought that this distress was kind of just part of the post-op period and that it would get better from here, but it didn't, and it kept getting worse. I actually started to subconsciously realize, because I was using the internet more, I was using social media more since I was like isolated from other people physically now. Um, People started like posting on social media a lot more, and it was often like other teenage girls my age who were like posting what I used to see of adult women on Instagram, like in skimpy clothing and like lots of makeup and like lots of filters.
Hmm.
Now it was teenage girls my age who were doing the same, and so um, I started to realize like, hey, I kind of miss looking like a girl and like
I
being
don't mean to
soft and like
laugh.
having
I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. It's like, yeah, because you're a kid and you're figuring out, oh, what's up? What? Oh, wait, maybe I'm upside down and that's down. Oh,
yeah.
really? Oh, okay. So you started to
And
have those realizations, like, oh, it might
mhm,
be kind of fun to be a girl.
yeah, um,
Oh,
it wasn't necessarily about like being a girl, or so I thought. It was more about the appearance.
okay.
I actually I had undiagnosed body dysmorphia. Um, and I actually secretly started to like buy makeup and like more feminine clothing, like skirts online. And I would wear this stuff, but I would just like keep it to like within like my room. And I started to withdraw a little bit, actually, a lot. My grades and even my school attendance, my class attendance started to drop, and I would just spend all day like just huddled up in my room, like either sleeping, eating, or playing video games. And I started to hit rock bottom mentally by this point. Um, it got so bad that my parents had to take me out of public school and put me in an online only program because it just wasn't working. And unfortunately, the online only program wasn't much better. But I did take a class on psychology and child development, and that was when I really started to realize what had been done. I had a lesson on. Are you familiar with Harry Harlow and his experiments on the infant rhesus monkeys?
Uh, I might be. You remind me.
So it's basically it basically studies the how the bond between mother and child works by using rhesus monkey infants and
Ra-
like surrogate mothers made out of either cloth or wire.
Yes. Okay. I thought you said racist monkey. Racist monkey. I was like, what?
No.
What are you talking about? No. Yes, I actually teach this in the class where they had one made out of metal, but
Yeah.
it had milk, and then one that
Hmm.
was soft, but it didn't. Yes, and the
Hmm.
monkeys would go to the soft one. And I use this as an example in my economics classes about wants and needs to say, like, we only need food and shelter. It's like, no, no, no. So they would stay with the soft one, and then they'd run over, get food when they're really hungry, but then run right back to the soft one.
Hmm.
Okay, yes, I'm with you. But I do want to hear
And
about racist monkeys if you got any stories.
I
Those
don't have
stupid
anything on
gorillas.
that.
All
But
right.
this was the first time that I really started thinking about like parenting and what that might look like for me, and also breastfeeding. I was informed that I wouldn't be able to breastfeed after my mastectomy, but I mean, I was a kid and I wasn't really capable of making that kind of decision. And especially before I knew anything about like parenting and
Yeah.
maternity, basically.
Yeah. You're not
I
thinking
learned that
about that. You're not thinking about parenting and maternity and
no,
breastfeeding when you're a child. No,
I
of
was barely
course.
trying to keep on my grades and fit in.
Yeah, you just don't want to get a pimple. I know. I hear you. Okay, so this started to open up some floodgates about
Yeah.
other things about life that you don't think about when you're young.
And I realized what I took for myself. and that I wasn't really equipped to make that kind of decision. And so this huge wave of grief just overcame me. And in the next 2 weeks, um, I basically withdrew almost entirely until one day I had the epiphany that transitioning was the biggest mistake of my life. And I wish that I never went through any of it.
It happened
And
quick.
that was when
That epiphany, it was it how much of an avalanche was that? Like was how much of a was it a slow burn? Like, oh, I'm learning psychology.
there was a bit of a buildup from the first few months after my mastectomy up until that point, but it started to that class actually expedited things, and I feel like the isolation and distress that I was in um, put a little more pressure on me, but also made it um, easier to introspect a little bit. So there were a lot of factors at play, um, but after that realization, I just kind of felt empty for a little bit. I didn't know what to do with myself. Um, I texted
You,
my mom about it because I couldn't.
okay.
Once again, I couldn't like bear to have that conversation face to face, and
It's another letter.
I didn't want my no. It wasn't a letter. It was over text this time.
Okay.
But I couldn't bear to have either of my parents seeing me in that kind of distress. I mean, it was this thing that me and them we invested so much time and effort in, and it was all for nothing. And I knew I felt awful about this, but I didn't want to induce that kind of guilt in them, and so I really struggled to have that kind of conversation with them for a really long time. But from then on, it was basically like I started to lose trust in my doctors, my physicians, my therapists, my gender specialist, and I basically was made to just figure out this process of detransitioning by myself. I decided to go off testosterone cold turkey, which probably wasn't the most responsible decision because it made me very sickly for a while. I was very prone to getting sick a lot, and I started developing like some about a year on testosterone. I actually started developing some issues with my urinary tract, and by going off of it, this temporarily made it worse. And it was so bad that like there would be like blood in my urine at times, and
Like UTIs?
yeah, it was like a UTI, but we couldn't we didn't figure out what was happening because I would try to get this figured out and like go to like an OBGYN, Euro GYN, and the care was just there was a huge wait list to see either of those. It took me about like 2 months to see the OB-GYN, and then I tried to contact a Euro GYN for the urinary issues to hopefully get um, figure out whatever is going on with it. And I couldn't even get like an in-person appointment with her. It was over the phone. I had like described my symptoms, but there was no there was no like physical examination. And she even discouraged me from getting an examination. She was like, "Oh, I don't think you need one, but if you feel like you need one, then you can request one. But you probably have this condition, and we can try to medicate it." And at first, they went with antibiotics because they thought it was a UTI, but the this temporarily made the issue better. But then it came back, and
So the doctors aren't listening to you about that.
no, and they weren't about anything.
Okay.
My therapist, my gender specialist, couldn't do anything because if they went against the gender affirming care model here in California, that would technically be considered conversion therapy. And so they weren't able to really help me, unfortunately, by law. They could have lost their jobs if they did. But my endocrinologist, she was the first person I reached out to, I think, and I asked her maybe about like a month or so after I stopped taking testosterone for some blood work, and I specifically told her I'm female and I expect to get the results back for an adolescent female. And when I got the results back, they sent guidelines for average sex hormone levels that were for teenage boys. Um, and then my surgeon, who I just reached out to this year, um, not only to report that I detransitioned, that I regretted my surgery, but also that I'm having these serious complications with it. I was only able to manage to get onto like a 5 minute call over the phone with him, and his advice to me was just, oh, keep doing what you're doing and keep wearing the bandages, but also put Vaseline on it. Put Vaseline on it. And this made my complications worse. That was the final straw. I can't even I can't even bring myself to open the app for my healthcare provider anymore because I just don't feel like I'm gonna get any help.
And now you're, I don't know how much you can talk about, but you're in the process of a lawsuit for this.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Ugh.
not only was I harmed physically by these treatments, I mean, I was a perfectly healthy kid before this, and now I have issues with my urinary tract and other areas of my health. I don't know if I'll be able to conceive a child or safely carry a term. I definitely won't be able to feed them naturally. Um, but I also wasn't really fully informed of the side effects.
When did
The
you
consent
decide
forms, they
when did you decide to go public with this and become someone that showed up on my radar that I could invite you to have a conversation?
so shortly after I detransitioned, I would make posts about like my transition regret, but I was very quickly shut down by other transgender people actually. They would say that I would talk about it too much and that by talking about it I would harm other real transgender people
Right.
and discourage them from transitioning. And some people would actually taunt me over my regret. They would say things like, "Oh, you deserve to feel this pain. Doesn't it hurt having lost your breasts like that? You're so stupid. You don't deserve parents who cared about you enough to let you do this." Um, and so I would just kind of shut up for a while. I gave into mob rule and I just stopped talking about it for a while. But then I started searching for communities online for people who are in my situation, and it immediately struck me how diverse in opinion the people on them were. I mean, a lot of them were people who went through the medical process of transitioning and then detransitioned, or they identified as transgender at one point and then they ended up desisting without any medical intervention. And they just they came from like all these walks of life and they had all different opinions, and it really made me challenge my own views and experiences. And after a while I realized I'm not the only one going through this, and I just can't shut up about this. And so I slowly built my way back up to speaking out about it again. I actually lost friends in person during the early stages of my detransition, because the distress of realizing my regret and having lost organs and going off of the treatments and getting all sickly and emotionally volatile, it made me into a pretty unstable person, and I wasn't always the nicest, and I guess my peers couldn't really handle it. And so at a time when I really needed that kind of support, especially from other people my age, I lost pretty much any chance at having it. And my senior year was probably my loneliest school year yet because I didn't really have any friends at school. but I did manage to make some friends outside of school who've kind of came and went. But I've found a group of people that in person that really cares about me, and they want me to succeed, and they encourage me to become a better person every day, and that's really been the biggest help. And they've encouraged me to start speaking out about this as well, because my story has made them realize that this whole just how deep this whole transgender thing goes. And now that they're transitioning children and there's cases like me popping up, somebody needs to speak out. And so I earlier this year I started making a Twitter, and at first it was for more casual purposes, just like browsing and then liking or retweeting stuff that I thought was funny. And then I actually started to use it as a platform to speak out about my experience and my thoughts and feelings about all this. And I wasn't expecting it to blow up the way it did, but it did.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that in speaking out about this, I can encourage other people, and especially other young girls and boys who have been through this, to speak out as well.
Have there been trans people that have been supportive of you?
Oh yeah, there's plenty actually, like Buck Angel, Blair White,
Yeah. Okay.
Sarah Higdon,
Buck is awesome.
quite
On
a
my
few. Yeah,
podcast.
he's really cool.
Um, I love him, and he is getting a lot of vitriol and hate from the community that he helped build. He's 60 years old. He helped build this. He got the first top surgery in California. Like, I think that it's really important. I had Mac Beggs on the podcast, who I think is just really awesome. Born female, transition to male, and is doing
Mhm.
way better as a boy, as a man,
Yeah,
than would have been. This is not an anti-trans thing. It's a recognition that we are individuals, and we can't silence certain people. There's an issue here, because being trans can be something truly beautiful and amazing. It can. And your story, trying to silence your story, does not take away from that. And it's really important that people understand that. And when people
hmm,
say, well, there's not that many detransitioners, yeah, there's not many trans people either. We're all the ultimate minority as the individual. And I don't
hmm,
care if there's one detransitioner, their voice matters. That's the point of America. That's the point of the 14th
absolutely,
Amendment, is that even if it's really small, when people say, well, there's not many of them, the same argument was used to shut down the voices of transgendered people. So no, because they're a smaller minority than this really small minority, now you're shutting down a minority any way you slice it. That's
exactly.
very upsetting. It's an important thing for people to understand. That being said, Chloe, how common is this? Truly, do we know how common this is? You
That's
would
the thing.
know,
We don't really have enough data on this, but
but
I'm
people,
starting every
yeah,
day we're starting to see
okay.
every week we're starting to see a new detransitioner pop up, and I've actually started to see I've heard from a few other people who have transitioned as minors, and that number has been increasing steadily over time, and
I think
it
it's
seems like
coming.
it just keeps growing
I think it's coming.
at an even faster rate. There's going to be a huge wave of people who
I think so
regret their
too, Chloe.
transition or have stopped transitioning.
And I think I mean, maybe it's a sloppy analogy, but you're kind of like a Jackie Robinson of this. You're kind of like the canary in the coal mine, where you're one of the first, because you are very young. You were born after 9/11. You were very young. And there's going to be a lot more. And you are blazing a pathway for this. I want to ask you something. Are you an artist?
I do actually.
Do
I
you
do
sing?
illustration as well as fashion design.
Do you sing?
I sang a lot when I was younger, but um, with testosterone, my range has kind of been screwed up, and my control over my
Yes.
voice. I want to be able to get that control back and hopefully be able to.
Right. But the
I
reason
don't
I
know.
the reason I ask Chloe is because my wife is a singer, and she says a lot of the great singers, like if you listen to like Beyonce's like speaking voice, it's actually pretty low.
Mm,
You said something where you said all of that was all for nothing. I just want to say to you, like, maybe not. maybe it
I
wasn't for
feel like there
nothing.
is a silver lining to it. I've learned a
Maybe
lot that I wouldn't have known before, and I think a really beautiful thing about this was that throughout all the suffering, I kind of got a glimpse of the sort of like what young men go through, and I feel like I understand the opposite sex a lot better, and I think
I just
that's one beautiful thing that's come out of this.
the best way we can frame negative experiences as happening for us and not to us. And
Hmm.
the reason I ask about being an artist is your voice and your story and everything matters, and art is a wonderful way to connect with people as well. I mean, I thank you for telling the story, but there's also there's the art of expression. You in 18 years have lived a life, and you have a long life to go, but you have lived a life, you have experience, and that's where beautiful art comes from. It comes from pain and pleasure and extremes. You've had extreme lows. So did Van Gogh, you know, I mean, so did every wonderful artist. So I just as like, you know, a teacher, you know, figure, you know, I would just encourage you to lean into art. I want to ask you one more thing, also, Chloe, because it's a concern of mine. Um, you are young. I have concerns about like the environment. Okay, I worry about. I think we have to solve some problems when it comes to things like global warming and pollution and plastic in the
Hmm.
ocean. I worry that Greta Thunberg is being used by people who truly mean well, but they have an agenda, and she is a child being used. I am not, I'm not, you know your life. I have concerns that you could be used, and and I don't mean this as an insult, and I hope that you can
Hmm.
respond, but I have concerns that you could be used as some sort of like golden goose to push some sort of anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, anti um uh that anti-agenda, that you're going to be used in that way. And maybe that's my own biases and prejudice against
No, I
certain more
understand that
conservative
completely.
news outlets. But that's, I
My
do have that concern. I just wanted to vocalize
mhm.
that to you.
My perspective is I don't really have much of a problem with adults transitioning, given that they're fully informed and that they're in the mental state to be able to make that decision for themselves. But children are not able to make this decision whether or not they're given the information that they need to be or not, because it's it's not for kids. This is an adult thing. And I don't think that adults should be barred from doing this after if they're if they've gotten like a proper psychological evaluation and the feelings persist for a long time.
Yeah, I love finding the overlap. And I think there needs to be overlap of like, I was actually talking to Mac about this, just in a private conversation, just essentially like, because he's a trans activist
Mm,
for sure. And but he's like, yeah, like there needs to be doctors who are doing due diligence. I'm excited for him to hear this. Excited. I'm curious about his feedback when he listens to this podcast, because it's like doctors are failing on this. They need to do better psych evaluations. They need to ask these
absolutely.
questions. And the fact that that's not happening, I hope that your story wakes people up and says, yeah, because that's where something where I think the left and the right, or whatever these divides are, people in the trans community can agree, like, yeah, let's just make sure that this doesn't happen. Everyone's on board that what happened to you and is happening to others should not happen. We can all agree on that. Let's agree on that trunk of the tree. We can disagree
Mhm.
on the branches, sure. You know, when it comes to prisons or military, okay, we can talk about that, but let's agree on the tree right now, that children need to be, at the very least, deeply, deeply vetted, deeply understand what's going on before
Absolutely.
anything is done, let alone going the full way, all the way into surgeries.
I think the minimum age should at least be 18 for any medical treatments. I am a little bit iffy on that because the brain doesn't stop developing until well
Five.
after 18, but it's
Well,
definitely not for
if you can go
minors.
over to Iraq and kick in doors, you know, to spread freedom, then Like, yeah, 18 is a silly age to make these kinds of big calls too. I mean,
And it's
all
kind of
kinds of
an
big calls.
arbitrary age
It
anyways. The
really
reason
is.
why
Yeah,
they set 18 to the minimum age for the military was because you're young and dumb and you'll you'll do just about anything.
yeah, yeah. Chloe, um, I think we should probably wrap this up. But thank you for telling your story. You, you're awesome. Please stay on it. Your story matters. You matter, and you've had dark times, but that is going to be. You're going to encounter people in your life, Chloe. You're going to encounter people that are going to go. Oh, I'm in a dark place. You don't know what this is like. And it's like,
Mhm.
motherfucker, yes, I do. Like, I was there. I know, you know, this is I don't know where your story is going to go, but I hope that you're going to get continued more and more love and appreciation for what you've gone through and what you're going to continue to go through. But you can build a beautiful life, and I think that you will. I hope that you will. And I'm going to be in your corner, and I think a lot of people will be in your corner, for your openness and willingness to talk about this stuff. And I really appreciate it, and I'm so sorry for the way you've been betrayed, and you've been let down by institutions that should have had your back and they didn't. And I'm very, very sorry for that, for that to happen to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me this platform to speak on.
Yeah.
It's really important that I get not only to parents and other concerned adults, but also especially educators,
Yeah.
because a lot of them don't know that this is going on. And there's even some teachers and school staff who push this onto children.
They don't
And I
know.
hope that, yeah, I hope that one day I can eventually speak to students and people
Yeah.
who are my age about this as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I got a network for you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Where can people connect with you? See what you're up to, follow it, everything. Where can people connect with you?
My main platform is Twitter. I also have an Instagram and YouTube channel, and they all have the same username. It's Chu Cole, CH and then three O's and then COLE. It's a weird username. It's just a nickname for me.
All good. All good. Chloe, thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for sharing your
Thank you.
story and being vulnerable. And I look forward to connecting with you again in the future.